Welcome to our deep dive into the flywheel effect. We're going to be talking about how businesses achieve success that lasts. You know, those companies like Amazon and Intel that just seem to keep winning? We're going to dig into how they do it and figure out how this concept can work for you too.
It's fascinating how the flywheel kind of dismantles the idea of overnight success. We see these remarkable results, but we often don't see the consistent effort that led up to them.
Right. It's not about one brilliant move, but a series of strategic choices all building on each other. Jim Collins, he uses this really powerful analogy in his book, Turning the Flywheel. It's about pushing a massive flywheel.
Yeah, imagine trying to move this giant, heavy wheel. It's tough at first. Each prick you give it only moves it a little bit, but as you keep pushing, it starts to gain momentum.
And eventually it's spinning with so much force, it almost moves effortlessly. It's a really captivating visual.
It is, and that's how companies like Amazon were built. Not through some grand scheme, but through steadily making smart choices that reinforce each other.
Let's talk about Amazon for a second. Back in the early 2000s, during the dot-com bust while everyone else was panicking, Bezos and his team, they were focused on their flywheel. They concentrated on lower prices, which then attracted more customers.
Right, and that surge in customers led to more sales volume, which drew in more third-party sellers. That increased their efficiency, which then allowed them to lower prices even further. And the cycle just keeps accelerating.
It's like a chain reaction of success. Each element strengthens the next, creating this self-sustaining cycle of growth. And it's not just about good intentions. It's about building a system where success just breeds more success.
Exactly. And what's also remarkable is how durable a well-designed flywheel can be even when the market changes.
So you're saying companies don't just throw away their flywheel when things shift?
Not at all. Take Intel, for example. They started with memory chips, but when that market got really competitive, they didn't abandon their core principles. They shifted their focus to microprocessors. They essentially transferred their existing momentum to a new product line.
So it's not about starting from scratch, but understanding the underlying mechanics that drive success and adapting them to new situations.
Exactly. Intel is a great example of how a truly great company's strength isn't a specific product. It's their underlying flywheel structure, a system for generating and sustaining success.
One thing I really appreciate about Collins is how practical he is. He actually lays out steps for building your own flywheel. He starts by saying, list your successes and your failures.
It forces you to really examine your past performance, to identify trends in what worked and what didn't. From there, you can pinpoint the key components that led to your achievements.
Then you sketch out your flywheel. You make sure each part logically leads to the next, creating this closed loop. It's like a blueprint for success.
It is, and importantly, you test it against your experiences. You fine-tune it, and you make sure it aligns with your passions and strengths. It's about creating a system that feels authentic and sustainable for you.
We've been talking about big corporations, but can individuals or smaller groups use this flywheel too?
Oh, absolutely. A great example is Deb Gustafson. She was an elementary school principal who used the flywheel to turn around a struggling school on a military base. I mean, imagine the challenges high student and teacher turnover, the stress of military life, and low academic performance.
It sounds incredibly difficult. How did she even begin to make a difference?
Well, Gustafson realized she couldn't wait for the education system to magically improve. She had to build a flywheel within her sphere of influence, so she focused on attracting passionate teachers, even if they didn't have a lot of experience.
That's interesting, the power of enthusiasm, right?
For sure, and she didn't stop there. She fostered collaborative teams to support those teachers, implemented frequent assessments of student progress, and she celebrated every child's learning, no matter how small. This helped to cultivate a culture of achievement within the school.
Right. By creating that positive and supportive environment, she was able to attract and retain more passionate educators. It's amazing how the cycle can work in any setting.
It really is. And as the school's reputation improved, Gustafson was able to attract even more talented teachers, which just fueled the cycle even more.
So it might seem simple on the surface, but the power of the flywheel is undeniable when you see it in action. It's about consistently taking the right steps, building momentum, and creating a system where success naturally multiplies over time.
And it's not just about getting to success, it's about sustaining it. Even when things are going well, you have to be vigilant about maintaining that flywheel, constantly refining it, adapting it to the ever-changing world.
Complacency can really be the downfall of even the most successful flywheel. It's about continuous improvement, innovation, and dedication to propelling that flywheel forward one turn after another.
If you think about it, the flywheel is really a framework for long-term thinking, for disciplined execution and relentless progress. It's about understanding that sustainable success isn't built on grand gestures, but on the accumulation of consistent, well-executed actions.
That actually reminds me of another concept Collins talks about, the idea of firing bullets than cannonballs.
Ah, yes. It's about testing new ideas before you commit significant resources. It's a way to mitigate risk when you're trying to innovate.
So instead of just launching into a massive project, you test the waters with smaller, low-risk trials, your bullets. And if those bullets prove successful and you gather valuable data,
Then you can confidently launch a cannonball. You can make that substantial investment with a much higher chance of success. We see this pattern a lot with companies that are really good at extending their flywheels.
like 3M, for example. They're known for abrasives, like sandpaper. But they successfully extended their flywheel into the world of adhesives, with products like Scotch tape. Or Boeing, they went from making military aircraft to commercial jets. They essentially applied their core competencies in a completely new market.
These are great examples of how a well-established flywheel can be a springboard for amazing expansion. It's not about abandoning what works, but building on it, using the momentum from those existing successes to propel new ventures forward.
But of course, not every company gets it right. There are cautionary tales too, like Circuit City.
Oh yes, Circuit City is a perfect example of what happens when you neglect the flywheel and you fall into what Collins calls the doom loop. They became so fixated on chasing the next big thing that their core business, consumer electronics retail, lost ground to competitors like Best Buy.
And what's so unfortunate is that Circuit City actually had a brilliant flywheel extension in the making, CarMax. They were poised to completely disrupt the used car market.
What's interesting is that Circuit City initially understood the potential of CarMax. They tested the concept with a few stores and saw it was working and started scaling it up. It could have been their next big growth engine.
But instead of integrating CarMax into their existing flywheel, they spun it off as a separate entity. It's like they missed the opportunity to leverage the momentum they had already built.
It's a reminder that even brilliant ideas can fail if you don't have the discipline to integrate them into a coherent flywheel. Circuit City ultimately lost their momentum. They fell into the spiral of trying to find quick fixes, and eventually they just couldn't recover.
It's a sobering reminder that success isn't a destination, it's a journey. And even the most successful companies need to stay focused on their flywheel, constantly refining it and adapting it to maintain that momentum.
Absolutely. History has shown us that the organizations that achieve lasting greatness are those that relentlessly commit to turning their flywheels year after year, decade after decade. They understand that greatness isn't a one-time achievement, it's a continuous pursuit.
That's a really inspiring thought to end on as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the flywheel effect. Building something truly great takes more than just a brilliant idea or a stroke of luck. It takes discipline, focus, and commitment to the long game.
This brings up a really important question for you as we dig deeper into this flywheel effect.
Yeah, I'm listening. What is it?
What are the key components of your own flywheel? What sequence of actions or decisions, when you execute them, will create that self-reinforcing cycle of success in your own life?
It's like trying to figure out the pieces of a puzzle, how they all fit together to create that unstoppable momentum.
Exactly. It's not just about identifying the elements, but understanding the logic that connects them. How does one component drive the next, creating that seamless, self-propelling loop?
And once you've got that core flywheel figured out,
Yeah.
you can start to think about how to expand it right, using those billets to explore possibilities before committing to the full cannonball.
Exactly. Let's say you're a musician. Your flywheel revolves around making great music, engaging with your audience, and constantly honing your craft.
Sounds like a pretty solid foundation for any musician.
It is, but maybe you're also interested in branching out, experimenting with different genres, collaborating with other artists, or finding new ways to connect with your fans online.
Those are all great ideas, but they could also require a lot of time and resources.
That's where the bullets come in.
Yeah.
You could try a small-scale collaboration, release a single in a new genre, or experiment with a different marketing approach online.
Basically gather some data, see what resonates, and then amplify what works.
Exactly that way, when you do decide to launch a cannonball, you're doing it with informed confidence. You're minimizing the risk of a costly misstep.
I really like how the flywheel encourages both discipline and creativity. It provides structure for consistent execution, but also leaves room for experimentation and expansion.
And it's crucial to remember that neglecting your flywheel can lead to a downward spiral. When people or organizations lose sight of the core principles that drive their success, they often fall into the trap of chasing quick fixes, reacting to problems instead of proactively building momentum.
It's like that saying, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind.
Exactly. In today's world, stagnation is not an option. To thrive, you have to constantly be pushing your flywheel forward, adapting, innovating, and making sure that every action contributes to that self-reinforcing cycle of success.
Speaking of innovation, Collins highlights another interesting example, the Ojai Music Festival. They've been running for over 75 years, consistently pushing the boundaries in contemporary classical music.
Oh yes, the Ojai Music Festival is a fascinating case study. They've managed to build a flywheel that not only sustains their organization, but actually drives artistic innovation year after year.
I'm curious, how does their flywheel work? It's not a typical business model, is it?
It's unique, but incredibly effective. It starts with attracting amazing talent. Renowned composers, musicians, conductors, they're all drawn to Ojai's reputation for artistic freedom and experimentation.
So attracting top-tier talent is the first component of their flywheel. What comes next?
They introduce rigorous constraints, which might sound counterintuitive. Each year, a different music director curates the festival. They bring their own unique vision, and they challenge the artist to work within very specific parameters.
So constraints actually drive creativity.
It seems that way at Ojai. These limitations actually foster innovation. They push the artists beyond their comfort zones, and that often results in unique and groundbreaking performances.
And I'm guessing those performances are what fuel the final component of their flywheel.
Exactly. The audience reactions are a crucial part of the Ojai experience. The audiences are known for their passionate engagement, their willingness to embrace the unconventional, and their enthusiastic support of the festival's mission.
So it's a self-perpetuating cycle. Exceptional talent attracts innovative programming, which generates enthusiastic audience response, which in turn solidifies Ojai's reputation and attracts even more exceptional talent.
Exactly. The Ojai Music Festival shows how the flywheel can work in any setting, even in the world of artistic expression. It proves that success isn't always about following conventional paths. It's about building a system where each element feeds into the next, creating a virtuous cycle of growth and achievement.
It's a good reminder that flywheels aren't just for businesses. They can operate in any field where you have consistent effort, strategic decision-making, and a passion for excellence.
Now, while we've talked about maintaining the flywheel and adapting it to changing circumstances, it's also important to remember that innovation within an existing framework can be just as crucial.
You mean the idea of sustaining the flywheel while also renewing it?
Precisely, it's about striking a balance between honoring the core principles that have brought you success, while also embracing new ideas and approaches to keep the flywheel relevant and thriving.
Can you give us some examples of organizations that have done that well?
Of course, the Cleveland Clinic is a great example. They're consistently ranked among the top hospitals in the U.S., and they've maintained a laser focus on patient care as the core of their flywheel for over a century.
So their dedication to patient well-being is really the driving force behind their success.
Absolutely. But they haven't stayed still. They've continuously adapted their structure, embraced technological advancements, and expanded their reach, all while staying true to that core principle of providing exceptional patient care.
It sounds like they've really mastered the art of evolution without compromising their fundamental values.
Exactly. They've recognized that while the flywheel provides a framework for success, it shouldn't be seen as rigid or inflexible. It needs to evolve and adapt to remain relevant in a changing world.
This reminds me of something we touched on earlier, the idea of firing bullets than cannonballs, as a way to test new ideas before making big investments.
Ah, yes, the bullets and cannonballs approach. It's a powerful tool for extending the flywheel. It allows for calculated growth and expansion.
Can you give some examples of companies that have used this strategy effectively?
Certainly, Apple's venture into handheld devices is a great example. Before they jumped headfirst into that market, they tested the waters with the Newton MessagePad PDA back in the early 90s.
The Newton, it wasn't exactly a huge hit, was it?
Not commercially, no, but it gave them incredibly valuable insights. It helped them refine their vision for what a handheld device could be. Those early bullets ultimately paved the way for the iPod and then the iPhone, products that revolutionized the way we interact with technology.
So even apparent failures can be valuable learning experiences. They can inform future successes.
Absolutely. They provide critical information that you can use to refine your approach and increase the likelihood of hitting the mark with your cannonballs.
This brings us back to the importance of avoiding the doom loop. That downward spiral that can happen when organizations lose sight of their flywheel and start chasing quick fixes.
Yes, the doom loop is a real danger. And Circuit City's downfall is a prime example of what can happen when you neglect your core business and stray from the principles that drove your success.
Their story really highlights the importance of staying true to your flywheel even when things get tough. But what are some signs that an organization might be headed for the doom loop?
One telltale sign is a fixation on chasing trends without considering how they align with the core flywheel. Another is a reactive approach to problem solving, constantly putting out fires instead of proactively addressing the underlying issues.
So it's about staying focused on the long-term vision, the core principles that drive sustainable success, rather than getting caught up in short-term fads or knee-jerk reactions.
Exactly. It's about remembering that building a truly great company, organization, or even a great life, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It requires discipline, consistency, and a willingness to stay true to your flywheel even when the going gets tough.
This has been a really insightful conversation. It's really shed light on the power and the applicability of the flywheel effect across so many different areas. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I think it'll be helpful to summarize what we've learned, to distill it down into some key takeaways for our listeners.
I agree. Summarizing the key points would be really valuable. Would you like to start us off?
Sure. One of the things that stands out to me is the idea of gradual progress. Building momentum over time, just like pushing that giant flywheel. Another crucial point is the need to define your own flywheel. Sketching it out, testing it against your experiences, and making sure it aligns with your passions and strengths. And finally, remembering to embrace innovation while staying true to your core principles, like the Cleveland Clinic with their unwavering focus on patient care. What else comes to mind for you?
Yeah, those are all excellent points. For me, the emphasis on adaptability really stands out. How a well-designed flywheel can handle those shifts in the market, like we saw with Intel, moving from memory chips to microprocessors.
And on that note of adaptability, we can't forget the bullets and cannonballs approach. Testing out those new ideas on a smaller scale before diving in with major resources. Apple's journey with the Newton message pad, which ultimately led to the iPod and iPhone. That's a perfect example.
Definitely. It reminds us that even those setbacks can be super valuable. They can help us pave the way for bigger wins down the road.
We also saw how the flywheel isn't just limited to the corporate world. Deb Gustafson, the school principal, and the Oshai Music Festival are proof of that. It works in all kinds of settings.
Totally. They highlight how those principles of consistent effort, strategic thinking, and a dedication to excellence, they can really apply across industries and disciplines.
So let's shift gears a bit. I think it'd be helpful for our listeners if we could synthesize everything we've talked about, put together a concise 10-point summary of the flywheel effect.
Sounds good to me. A nice way to wrap up all the key concepts.
You want to kick us off?
Sure thing. Okay, so point number 1. Building a great company or achieving any significant goal, it's a gradual process. It's like pushing that giant flywheel to build momentum. Point number 2. Amazon's success can be attributed to its flywheel. Lower prices attract more customers, which leads to increased sales. This attracts more sellers, which then leads to greater efficiency and even lower prices. Point number 3, the durability of a well-designed flywheel is evident. Look at Intel's transition from memory chips to microprocessors. It shows how a great flywheel can adapt to changes in the market.
Great points. Okay, let me add a few more. Point number 4, to create your own flywheel. You got to identify those repeatable successes and failures, analyze what they have in common. Sketch out the flywheel with a clear sequence. And test it against your own experiences. Make sure it aligns with what you're passionate about. Point number 5, the flywheel principle. It can be used beyond just CEOs. Leaders at all levels can use it to achieve success. Just like Deb Gustafson did when she turned around that failing elementary school. Her flywheel focused on attracting passionate teachers, fostering collaboration, assessing progress, and celebrating every child's learning. Point number 6, the flywheel concept extends beyond the business world. We see it in all sorts of fields, like with the Oshai Music Festival. They attract amazing talent. They use those rigorous constraints to drive creativity. And then they have those passionate audience reactions. All of that fuels community support and brings in even more top talent.
Fantastic additions. Okay, point number 7, executing and innovating effectively. It's all about embracing the genius of the A&D. You sustain the flywheel while also continuously renewing it. The Cleveland Clinic is a great example of this. They've got that constant focus on patient care while adapting to new needs and structures.
Let's add points 8 and 9 then. Extending the flywheel means firing bullets, then cannonballs. Test those new ideas before making major investments. It allows for that smart, measured growth and expansion, like Apple did when they ventured into handheld devices. And then avoiding the doom loop, that means staying true to the flywheel principle. Resist the urge to chase those quick fixes when you face challenges. We can learn from Circus City's decline. They neglected their core business and spun off a potentially successful extension.
And finally, point number 10, the big takeaway here. The organizations that achieve that lasting greatness, they're the ones that are constantly committed to turning their flywheels. They're always refining and adapting them to keep that momentum going and achieve that sustainable success.
What a fantastic summary. We've really explored the flywheel effect in depth today, looking at it from different perspectives and seeing how it plays out in different situations. As we wrap up, I encourage you to think about this. What are the core components of your own flywheel? What small bullets can you start firing today to explore new possibilities and get closer to your goals?
And remember, that journey from good to great, it's never truly over. There's always another turn of the flywheel, another opportunity to refine, adapt, and reach even higher. So keep pushing, keep innovating, and never stop believing in the power of those consistent, well-executed actions.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those flywheels spinning.